The number one question I get every single day, flooding my inbox, dominating the comment section, is this. If XRP is supposed to be the future of finance, why is nobody on mainstream media talking about what just happened? Because something did just happen. While you were watching the price chop sideways, while you were watching Bloomberg anchors stumble through interviews where they didn't even know the Ripple lawsuit was over, while you were watching the so-called experts argue about whether XRP has a use case, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the most powerful banking regulator in the United States, quietly issued a statement that rewrites the entire architecture of American finance. In plain English, the OCC just told every national bank and Federal Savings Association in this country, you can custody crypto, you can hold the reserves backing stablecoins, and you can use distributed ledger technology for payment activities. Legally, today, right now. And here's the part the world missed, the part Bloomberg won't explain to you, the part that should be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, but isn't. This isn't a green light for crypto. This is a green light for a very specific kind of infrastructure, and only a handful of networks on Earth can actually deliver it. Let me pull back the curtain. Welcome back. Today we decode what the regulators just unlocked, why the timing is not a coincidence, and why the smart money is positioning while retail is still arguing about candles. Before we go under the surface, none of this is financial advice. This is structural analysis. Let's jump in. Let's start with the hard truth. 95% of people watching the crypto market right now are staring at the wrong screen. They're watching price. They're watching social media sentiment. They're watching whether Bitcoin breaks 70,000 or 72,000. Meanwhile, the actual architecture of the next financial system is being assembled in plain sight, and almost nobody is reading the blueprints. Here's what you need to understand. When the OCC says a national bank can custody crypto assets and hold deposits as reserve-backing stablecoins and use distributed ledger technology for payment activities, they are not making three separate announcements. They are describing one integrated stack, custody, settlement, and payments, that banks now need to build, license, or partner into. And banks don't build, banks integrate. Think about this logically. JP Morgan is not going to spin up its own Layer 1 blockchain. Bank of America is not going to staff up 100 engineers to write consensus algorithms. Wells Fargo is not going to take on the regulatory risk of being the custodian for billions of dollars in customer crypto if there's a hack. The reputational blast radius alone would end careers. So what do? They de-risk, they partner, they license infrastructure from entities that have already done the work. The entities that already have the broker-dealer registrations, the qualified custody licenses, the global payment corridors, the institutional-grade legal scaffolding. This is what retail doesn't see. The OCC didn't just permit crypto. The OCC just created a multi-trillion-dollar procurement event for banking infrastructure. And the vendors who win that contract are the ones who spent the last decade quietly building exactly what the banks now need. Ripple bought a prime broker, Hidden Road, clearing nearly $3 trillion annually. Ripple bought Standard Custody, becoming a New York-chartered trust company. Ripple bought Medico, the Swiss institutional custody platform used by Tier 1 banks. Ripple is launching a stablecoin under the framework that the OCC just legitimized. And the settlement layer for all of it, the rail underneath, is the XRP ledger. You see the picture forming? Retail is watching candles. Institutions are watching contracts. Let's do the math. Because this is where the story stops being a narrative and starts being a requirement. The OCC's announcement opens the door for U.S. banks to participate in three converging markets. Cross-border payments, currently a $150 trillion annual flow, dominated by SWIFT, with average settlement times of 2 to 5 days, and pre-funded Nostro-Vostro accounts that lock up roughly $27 trillion of dead capital globally. Stablecoin reserves, which currently sit at around $200 billion in circulating supply, but are projected by Standard Chartered, Citi, and Bernstein to grow to between $2 and $4 trillion by 2030 once banks can issue and hold them directly. Tokenized real-world assets, which BlackRock's Larry Fink has publicly described as the next generation of markets. A market sized at over $4 trillion in projections for 2026, expected to grow fourfold this year alone, according to industry analysts tracked by KeyRock. Now think about that math. If even a fraction of 1% of cross-border payment flow moves to on-demand liquidity using a digital asset bridge, we are talking about hundreds of billions of dollars annually requiring a neutral settlement asset. Not a stablecoin pegged to one currency, a neutral bridge, a pipe. Here's the math the retail crowd ignores. XRP has a fixed total supply of 100 billion. Roughly 59 billion are in circulation. Tens of billions are locked in escrow, released and largely relocked monthly. Exchange reserves have been draining steadily as long-term holders and institutional wallets accumulate. If the XRP ledger captures even 1% of the $150 trillion cross-border market, that's $1.5 trillion of annual flow trying to move through a thinning float of available tokens. This isn't a prediction. It's a plumbing problem, and the laws of physics don't negotiate. While retail investors are panic selling because Bitcoin had a deleveraging event in October, the institutional signal has never been louder. Look at the evidence stacking up just in the last several months. The Genius Act, the U.S. federal stablecoin framework, passed and signed, giving banks the legal scaffolding to issue and back stablecoins. The Clarity Act, H.R. 3633, reported out of the House Committees on Financial Services and Agriculture in June of 2025, defines digital commodities, establishes CFTC jurisdiction, and creates a mature blockchain classification that pulls qualifying networks out of perpetual SEC limbo. The SEC Crypto Task Force under Commissioner Hester Pierce, with Chairman Paul Atkins now confirmed, has explicitly stated their mission is to draw clear regulatory lines, provide registration paths, and stop deploying enforcement as policy. The lawsuit against Ripple, over, Coinbase, dismissed, Robinhood, closed, OpenSea, closed. A 2x leveraged XRP ETF is now trading on U.S. exchanges. Spot XRP ETFs from multiple major issuers are live and pulling consistent inflows. Triumph's CEO said it on Bloomberg, plain as day. The previous regime was a blocker. The blocker is gone. Societe Generale's regulated banking subsidiary, SG Forge, expanded its Euro CV stablecoin onto the XRP ledger, Stellar and Solana. That is a Tier 1 European bank, MiCA compliant, voluntarily choosing the XRPL as a deployment chain for institutional collateral movement. The DTCC, the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, the entity that settles essentially every U.S. equity trade, ran its great experiment pilot citing Ripple, Stellar, Solana, and Ethereum as the rails for on-chain collateral. Ask yourself this brutal question. Does a trillion-dollar clearinghouse like the DTCC pilot infrastructure without absolute legal certainty? Does SG Forge deploy a regulated stablecoin onto a blockchain on a whim? Does the OCC issue formal interpretive guidance permitting crypto custody without knowing exactly which providers are ready to fulfill those contracts? They don't gamble, they position. If you've made it this far, you're already in the top 1% of people who actually understand what's being built. Do me one favor. Hit the like button, drop the word blueprint in the comments so I know who's actually paying attention. And if this is the kind of analysis you've been searching for, the kind nobody on mainstream financial media is willing to connect for you, subscribe. We're on the road to 100,000, and every single one of you matters. Now let's get into the part that almost nobody is talking about. The Clarity Act is the final green light. It's the moment, the last gray zone, the question of whether a digital commodity is a security under the Howey test, gets a statutory answer. Once that bill clears the Senate and is signed, the risk premium that has kept Tier 1 banks on the sidelines vanishes overnight. The OCC interpretive guidance is the operational green light. Banks now have written permission. They are no longer asking, can we? They are asking, with whom? The U.K. broader regulatory framework rolls out by 2026. The EU's MiCA framework is fully live. Singapore's Payment Services Act is operational. Switzerland's DLT law is enabling tokenized securities. Every major financial jurisdiction is converging on the same answer in the same window. This is not a coincidence. This is coordinated regulatory architecture being assembled across the G7 in real time. And the networks that meet the compliance bar, neutral, decentralized, performant, with existing institutional integrations. Graduate, the networks that don't, get left behind to retail speculation. When the final piece of U.S. legislation arrives, the wait-and-see capital becomes the all-in capital. The vendor selection cycle, which in traditional banking takes 18 to 36 months, is already running behind the scenes. The contracts being negotiated today determine who runs the rails for the next 20 years. We are moving from an era of abundance to an era of scarcity. For more than a decade, retail investors have had the privilege of buying whole units of XRP at sub-$, then sub-$3 prices. That privilege exists because the institutional bid has been suppressed by legal uncertainty. Remove the uncertainty, and the floor moves. Once a token enters a multi-signature institutional vault, a standard custody cold storage allocation, an Anchorage digital qualified custody account, a bank treasury reserve, it doesn't come back to market for a 10% profit. It is gone. It is collateral. It is balance sheet infrastructure. Exchange reserves of XRP have been steadily declining. Long-term holder addresses have been steadily accumulating. The float that actually trades, the liquid available supply, is shrinking quietly, methodically, while the headlines talk about anything else. When the final regulatory switch is flipped, the retail door narrows fast. The institutions have spent years using volatility to shake out impatient holders so they could accumulate at suppressed prices. The red candles you've been watching weren't weakness. They were the silence of a predator waiting to strike. the exit liquidity of the confused funding the entry of the informed. The door is closing fast, and the people who understand that aren't shouting, they're stacking. I know it's tough. I know watching the chart bleed sideways while Bloomberg anchors mock the technology you've researched for years feels exhausting. I know the headlines create fear. I know your friends and family roll their eyes when you try to explain what's actually being built. But as an analyst, I'm trained to distinguish between noise and signal. And the signal right now is deafening, if you know where to listen. The noise is the price ticker. The noise is the Bloomberg anchor who didn't know the SEC lawsuit ended. The noise is the speculation about whether Bitcoin breaks a round number this week. The signal is the OCC formally authorizing crypto custody for national banks. The signal is the Genius Act becoming law. The signal is SG Forge deploying a regulated stablecoin onto the XRPL. The signal is DTCC piloting on-chain collateral. The signal is Ripple owning a prime broker, a trust company, and an institutional custody platform. A fully vertically integrated banking infrastructure stack that didn't exist 3 years ago. While the masses are focused on whether the next candle is green or red, the smart money is signing 20-year infrastructure contracts. Being early feels exactly like being wrong, right up until the moment reality catches up. And then it feels like genius. The question is not whether the price recovers. The question is who is still holding when the institutional bid arrives, and whether the average person can still afford a whole unit when it does. So here's where we stand. The OCC has opened the gates. The Genius Act has built the framework. The Clarity Act is finishing the legal scaffolding. The SEC has stopped being a weapon. Banks are legally authorized to custody crypto, hold stablecoin reserves, and run payments on distributed ledger technology. SG Forge, DTCC, BlackRock, and a growing list of Tier 1 institutions are not waiting. They are deploying. And underneath the entire architecture, neutral, fast, finalized in 3 seconds, fixed supply, no central operator, decade of compliance integrations, sits a settlement layer that the rest of the world is only now beginning to understand. Price is a distraction. Infrastructure is the reality. One is a chart, the other is a bridge. History does not reward comfort. It rewards those who pay attention when the room is quiet. Drop blueprint in the comments if you understand what's actually happening. Share this with the one person in your life who still thinks crypto is a scam. And subscribe, because the next 6 months will rewrite the financial system. And you deserve to see it coming before it arrives. Stay patient. Stay rational. The math doesn't lie, and the system is almost complete.